two articles are from SciTable, which is an organization from the journal Nature. And the journal Nature, of course, is where Watson and Crick published their article about the structure of DNA. Very, very famous publication. And so this first one is on the diversity of behavior. So some of you read this article, and others of you read this article. Both environment and genetic makeup influence behavior. So some of you kind of looked at the what of behavior, and some of you kind of looked at the who is influencing behavior, even though environment and genes, nature, nurture aren't who's. But what I'd like for you to do now is I'd like for you to get with a partner who has a different article than you, and on a blank sheet of paper, if you'll label it behavior, starting with the what and the who. But of course, you know, we're not satisfied with that. Of course, the bigger focus is the how. How does behavior happen? What are the mechanisms that allow behavior to happen? Look at the mechanisms on a cellular level. See if you can hypothesize some of the cellular level mechanisms that allow behavior to happen. And then look at, you knew this word was coming, why? Why does behavior happen? Keep in mind that we want to make sure that we're looking at the diversity of life. Even though we think of behavior as an animal characteristic, it's not. It's found in every living organism. So make sure that you're kind of trying to address that. You are trying to address the diversity of behaviors, the influence of behavior. So these are really the two articles, and you might address them separately, you might address them together. It's up to you and your partner. But I really want you to try to draw out of these two articles the important things. From here, you'll want to just press pause on the video and spend about 25 minutes really diving deep. Please use all of that time. Even though behavior is something that we think we know a lot about, that's why you study psychology. That's why there's so much study of nature versus nurture. So pause the video, 25 minutes, and then come back and have your notes out. So when you're ready for the notes, this is chapter 52 in your textbook. It's kind of a little disorganized when I look at it. So I'm going to try to break it up into a slightly more chunk size idea. When we look at behavioral biology, we do want to make sure that we understand what a behavior is. A behavior is a response to a stimuli or a stimulus. So really any cell is able to respond to a stimulus. Think back to our SHMU lab. Think about bacteria and quorum sensing. Communication is a big part of this. So we look at cell-to-cell communication, and we also look at organism-to-organism communication. When we look specifically at animals, we do want to keep in mind that animals have a unique body structure called, some animals have a unique body structure called a brain. And the brain has multiple components. It has the ability to sense. It has the ability to integrate or process. So this is what we might think of as thinking. And then we have our reaction ability, which is really going to fall to motor neurons. But we might just not be using muscles. We might also be responding by the use of hormones. So when we look at behavioral patterns, we do have to be aware of the idea of nature versus nurture. So what patterns are the result of genes, and what patterns are the result of our environment? And really, when we look at nurture, this is where we're talking about learned behaviors. And when we're looking at genes, this is where we're talking about innate behaviors. It's interesting to think about innate behaviors. How is a behavior coded for by your genes? Where does this come from? And so if we think about the origin, now all of these are going to be adaptations adaptation. So behavior itself is an adaptation. Remember, adaptive value, that term means what sort of advantage as an adaptation. And keep in mind, an adaptation is a genetic trait. So how does this genetic mutation or genetic trait help us better survive? Well, the adaptive value of innate behaviors is that there is no practice required. This could be as simple as releasing a hormone and having a receptor. So a hormone receptor, this can be part of an innate behavior, being able to receive a hormone and that have a response. That's an innate behavior. When we look at innate behaviors in animals, we tend to think of actions that we do. And so this is what's going to be called a fixed action pattern. Innate behaviors in animals are a fixed action pattern. Now, the fight or flight that we've been talking about is actually a fixed action pattern. As soon as your brain perceives danger or stress, it's going to start that whole process of releasing epinephrine, and epinephrine having an effect inside of your cells, and you can't stop it. Now, you can condition your brain of what you perceive as stress and what you do not perceive as stress. But if stress is perceived, then your body goes through a fixed action pattern. Fixed action patterns are part of innate behaviors. The body does them without processing. So some of these are going to be on a cellular level, and they're going to be based on chemicals and hormones. Others are going to be muscles. So when we think of innate behaviors, sometimes we think of reflexes. Keep in mind, innate means it's coded for by your genes. You don't have to practice, no one teaches you. So when we think of reflexes, a lot of times we think that I touch something hot and I pull back. That's a reflex. And if you learn a little bit more about the brain, you know that a reflex actually doesn't get processed by the brain. It gets processed by your central nervous system, your spinal cord, and that is what allows the reaction to be faster rather than the signal having to go up to the brain. But what we need to know about simple innate behaviors is it's more than just pulling back. It's coughing. It's sneezing. It's choking. It's vomiting. It's blinking. Reflexes can be any of these, and you should be able to identify what is the adaptive value of vomiting. If there is something that triggers a response in your body as a poison or a toxin, being able to vomit and get that out is a huge advantage. Blinking, if there's dust in the air and you're blinking. Crying, there are a lot of simple innate behaviors that happen every day that we have no idea is happening. When a door slams and you look towards it, a loud noise causing you to look, that is a simple innate behavior. You should be able to identify the stimuli and identify the response, as well as identify why that response is an advantage. When we start to look at other innate behaviors, some of them are more complex. So we could look at the idea of a spider's web. Spider's web. No one teaches a spider how to spin a web. No one teaches a dog how to bark. You don't sit at home and teach your dog, arf, arf, this is how you bark when someone walks by. No one teaches a lot of these behaviors, and that's why they're still considered innate. Now, what we see down here is sometimes you do have to mature enough to be able to do them. So for example, walking or movement. Those are innate behaviors. We think, oh, you have to practice walking. But although there's a little bit of practice to it, a lot of it more has to do with your development. How are your muscles developed and how can you coordinate that? So what we're going to see is that a lot of behaviors are actually a combination of the two. Continuing to talk about innate behaviors, there are a few that you are expected specifically to know. One of them is movement. So movement really is an innate behavior. In humans and other mammals and some other animals, we see that it kind of becomes a combination. But the basic desire to move is really going to be innate in animals. We have two types of movements, kinesis and taxis. What I want you to think of first is taxis is like the word taxi. So we go in a direction. We can have positive taxis, we can have negative taxis. So if you smell cookies, you're going to move towards the baking cookies. That would be positive taxis. And that's going to be chemotaxis, movement towards a chemical. You can also have negative taxis, moving away from a smell. The other type of taxis that we'll see is phototaxis. This is movement towards or away from light. So while there are other stimuli that trigger movement towards or away, these are the two main ones. And you are expected to know that these are examples of innate behaviors. Think about a moth moving towards a light. Or if you pick up a rock, an insect scatter, that movement away from light. So it's going to depend on the genes of the organism and what the advantage is for the organism. Kinesis is a slightly different movement. It is going to be random. So if you've ever touched an earthworm and seen it kind of squiggle all over the place, it's not moving towards or away or in a certain direction, it's just moving randomly. And a lot of organisms will do this to distract the predators so that you're not sure where exactly they're going. There's two more categories that we need to know about complex innate behaviors, and one of them is different types of rhythms. So when we look at rhythms, what we're really talking about are cycles. So cycles of behavior. Circadian rhythms are based on a 24-hour cycle, and seasonal rhythms are going to be based more on the yearly cycle. When we look at circadian rhythms, this is when we really see them broken into two types, nocturnal versus diurnal. That's D-I-U-R-N-A-L, diurnal. So nocturnal and diurnal are your main circadian rhythms, and they are programmed into your body. This is genetic. Can you overcome them? Yes, but we actually see some really negative effects in people who work the night shift in terms of their body rhythms. Seasonal rhythms, these are going to be yearly, so we don't see them as much in humans, but we do see them in organisms, for example, that hibernate. Hibernation is actually going to be a decrease in metabolism, so decrease in metabolism due to cold weather. There's also something called estivation, so you do need to know both of these. Estivation is a decrease in metabolism because of heat. So organisms that are ectothermic, when it gets really hot, they're actually going to have to slow their body down. This is why reptiles, amphibians will burrow into the cold mud of an aquatic area to help cool down. So these rhythms, we also see migration is an example of a seasonal rhythm. Again, this is not taught. This is an innate behavior. The organism knows how to get where it's going, and they're really not sure exactly how the body knows all of this. And so there's a lot of interesting research. The other thing that we need to know is the idea of territoriality versus aggression. Territoriality is going to be claiming an area. So it turns out that when your dog pees every 10 feet, or your cat rubs up against you, the cat is actually putting scents from a gland behind its ear onto you, onto your couch, claiming them as theirs. And what this helps do is it actually decreases competition because you're finding your own area. So an innate behavior that is not taught, but that helps an organism better find its own resources. Aggression, just real quickly, is going to decrease the likelihood of a fight. If you're able to scare the organism off, then you don't have to fight the organism and risk life and limb. So baring the teeth is an example of aggression.